In the heart of London's financial district, there was one man everyone feared. His name was Alexander Blackstone, a billionaire CEO whose words could make or break careers in a single breath. He didn't smile. He didn't forgive. And if you dared to cross him, you wouldn't last the week. The office was a kingdom, and Alexander was its cold, unshakable king. People learned to speak softly, move quickly, and never meet his eyes. No one argued. No one challenged him. No one, until she arrived. Her name was Emily Carter, a single mother with no corporate experience, no interest in office politics, and absolutely no fear of telling the truth. She came for a simple cashier job. She had no idea that one ordinary morning, she would do the unthinkable. She stood up to him. And in that moment, the man everyone feared found someone he couldn't ignore. The rain had been falling all morning in central London, painting the city in shades of grey. Inside the towering glass headquarters of Blackstone Enterprises, the atmosphere was just as cold as the weather outside. The employees moved quickly through the corridors, speaking in hushed voices, eyes cast downward, not because they were shy, but because they feared one man. Alexander Blackstone, the CEO and owner of the multi-billion-pound investment company, was infamous in the industry for two things: his ruthless business tactics and his equally ruthless attitude toward his employees. Alexander had the looks of a man who had everything: tall, impeccably dressed in tailored Italian suits, his dark hair always perfectly in place, but the warmth of a winter storm. He didn't smile, he didn't make small talk. He issued orders like a general at war, and God help the poor soul who made a mistake in front of him. In the office, stories about his temper circulated like ghost tales. One assistant swore she'd seen him fire a man over a typo in an email. Another said he'd made a department head cry in front of the entire board for showing up 2 minutes late to a meeting. Whether all of it was true didn't matter. The fear was real. That morning, the atmosphere had been particularly tense. Alexander was due to visit the ground floor operations for the first time in months. The reason? The company had just launched a new payment processing branch, and he wanted to see how his investments were performing. In the main reception area, employees adjusted their ties and smoothed their skirts nervously. "He's coming down in 10 minutes, whispered Daniel, the floor supervisor. "Everyone remember. No unnecessary chatter, no jokes, and for heaven's sake, don't look him directly in the eyes unless he speaks to you first." Standing a little apart from the rest of the group was a woman no one quite knew yet. She had started just a week ago as a cashier for the company's in-house payment center. Her name was Emily Carter. Emily was in her late 20s, with chestnut brown hair pulled into a loose bun and a warm, open face that contrasted sharply with the stiff, guarded expressions around her. She wasn't particularly intimidated by the warning. After all, she had worked tougher jobs before, juggling double shifts to support her 5-year-old daughter. If anything, she thought people might be exaggerating about this so-called terrifying CEO. "Just keep your head down," Daniel murmured to her as he passed. "You're new. Don't draw attention to yourself." Emily nodded politely, though inside, she wasn't the type to keep her head down if someone was being unreasonable. She had learned in life that silence often gave bullies more power. Moments later, the sound of polished leather shoes echoed against the marble floor. The elevator doors slid open, and out stepped Alexander Blackstone himself. He was even more striking in person, broad-shouldered with a confident, measured stride. He scanned the room with eyes the color of steel. Every person in the lobby seemed to shrink under his gaze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. "Morning," he said curtly, though it sounded more like an inspection than a greeting. Daniel stepped forward, already nervous. "Mr. Blackstone, we're honored to have you here. If you'd like, I can walk you through." "Save the formalities," Alexander interrupted, his tone sharp. "I want to see real performance, not rehearsed speeches." The tension in the air was almost visible. Alexander moved from station to station, glancing at computer screens, making quick, cutting remarks when he saw something he didn't like. "Your processing speed is slow," he told one operator. "We're not running a charity here." To another, "That's not how you handle high-value transactions. Fix it." Finally, he reached the cashier desk, Emily's desk. She was in the middle of helping an elderly gentleman who looked flustered and was struggling to understand the payment form. Emily was speaking to him calmly, explaining each step in plain language, even filling out parts of the form for him to save time. Alexander's voice cut through like a blade. "This is a business, not a social club. You're wasting time." Emily looked up, startled, not because of his words, but because of the dismissive tone. "I'm just making sure he understands the process," she said, keeping her voice even. "That's not your job," Alexander replied coldly. "Your job is to process payments, not hold someone's hand." The elderly man glanced between them nervously, clearly embarrassed. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She hated when people in power made others feel small. "With respect, sir," she said carefully. "He's our customer. Making sure he's comfortable with the process is part of the service. If that takes an extra minute, I think it's worth it." The room went silent. No one, absolutely no one, ever spoke back to Alexander Blackstone. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his otherwise impassive face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily Carter." "You're new," he said, as though that explained her audacity. "I'll give you one warning. In this company, efficiency comes before sentimentality. If you can't handle that, you won't last long." Emily met his gaze without flinching. "Understood. But with respect, if I have to choose between treating people like human beings and rushing them through like they're on an assembly line, I'll always choose the first." The shock on the faces of her colleagues was almost comical. Daniel looked like he might faint. Alexander's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Interest, perhaps, or curiosity. "We'll see how long that attitude survives here," he said before turning away. Emily went back to helping the elderly man as if nothing had happened, though her heart was racing. She didn't realize it yet, but that small act of defiance had just changed everything. The rest of the day passed in a haze of whispered disbelief. By the time Emily clocked out, she had become the subject of every office conversation. In the break room, two clerks stared at her like she'd just walked out of a war zone. "I can't believe you talked to him like that," one said. "I can't believe you're still employed," the other added, half joking. Emily smiled faintly. "I wasn't rude. I just said what I thought." "That's exactly why people don't survive here," the first clerk said. "This place is about keeping your head down and doing your job, not challenging the king." Emily shrugged. Maybe the king needs to hear the truth once in a while. She went home that night to her small flat on the edge of the city. Her daughter, Sophie, ran to greet her as soon as she opened the door, blonde curls bouncing, gap-toothed smile wide. The stress of the day melted instantly when Sophie wrapped her little arms around her waist. "Mummy, look. I drew you," Sophie said proudly, holding up a crayon drawing of a stick figure with brown hair and a big smile. Emily crouched down, taking the picture. "It's beautiful. You're the best artist in London." Her evenings were simple. Dinner, homework, bedtime stories. But as she tucked Sophie into bed, Emily found her mind drifting back to the sharp gray eyes of Alexander Blackstone. She didn't like admitting it, but beneath the irritation he caused, there was a spark of curiosity. What had made him so cold? The next morning, Emily expected things to go back to normal, if normal meant working under the shadow of a CEO who terrified everyone. But when she walked into the office, she found Daniel waiting for her at the door. "Mr. Blackstone wants to see you in his office," Daniel said, his voice low like he was delivering bad news. Emily frowned. "Why?" Daniel shrugged. "If I knew, I'd warn you. Good luck." Alexander's office was on the top floor, with panoramic windows overlooking the Thames. Everything in it was expensive. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, a marble bar in the corner. Alexander himself was standing by the window, looking out over the city like he owned it. "You wanted to see me," Emily said, keeping her tone polite. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "You handled that customer yesterday as if you were running a cafe, not a financial institution." Emily folded her arms. "If this is about—" "Let me finish," he said, and for a second she braced for another lecture. But instead, his mouth curved slightly, not into a smile exactly, but something close. "It worked. That man came back this morning to move his entire account to us. Do you know why?" Emily blinked. "Because I helped him." "Because you made him feel respected," Alexander said. "In 20 years of running this company, no one has ever spoken to me the way you did yesterday. And no one has ever made me think twice about how we treat people at the counter." Emily hesitated, unsure if this was a compliment or a warning. "So, you're saying you agree with me?" "I'm saying you surprised me," he replied. "I don't like being surprised." There was a beat of silence before he added, "You're coming with me to the client dinner tonight." Emily blinked again. "What? Why me?" "Because you apparently know how to talk to people without making them hate us. We're something formal. 6 o'clock. Don't be late." And just like that, he turned back to the window, dismissing her. The dinner was at one of London's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of place where the wine list didn't have prices printed next to it. Emily had borrowed a navy blue dress from her neighbor and pinned her hair up neatly, feeling slightly out of place as she followed Alexander into the candlelit dining room. The clients were a wealthy couple from Switzerland, there to discuss an investment deal. Emily was quiet at first, letting Alexander handle the business talk, but when the conversation drifted toward travel, she found herself chatting about the cities she'd visited in her 20s. The Swiss couple seemed charmed. Even Alexander watched her with a subtle, assessing look, as though he was seeing her for the first time. When the deal was finalized and the clients had left, Alexander walked her to a waiting car. The night air was cool, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. "You did well tonight," he said simply. "Thanks," Emily replied. "I was just being myself." "That's exactly what makes you different," he said, his gaze holding hers a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often. Alexander began stopping by the cashier desk, not to criticize but to observe. Sometimes he'd ask Emily's opinion on small operational matters. Other times he'd bring her into meetings she had no business attending, just to hear a fresh perspective. The other employees were stunned. It was as if the office tyrant had found a person he actually respected. One afternoon, after a particularly chaotic day, Emily was walking out of the building when she found Alexander waiting by the entrance. "Can I give you a ride home?" he asked. Emily hesitated. "I usually take the bus." "Consider this a thank you for not quitting after your first week," he said. In the car, the conversation was surprisingly easy. They talked about music, about London's best coffee shops, even about Sophie, though Emily noticed Alexander didn't say much about his own personal life. Still, there were moments, brief and unguarded, when she caught glimpses of something softer beneath the steel. By the time he dropped her off, she realized something unsettling. She didn't just respect him now. She was starting to like him. It was a Thursday morning when the shift in their relationship truly began. Emily was sorting through the morning receipts when her phone buzzed. An incoming call from the school. Her stomach dropped. Sophie had been unwell the night before, but Emily had sent her to school thinking it was just a cold. Now the school nurse was on the line, saying Sophie had a high fever and needed to be picked up immediately. Emily's heart pounded. Her shift had barely started, and Daniel was already juggling staff shortages. "I'm so sorry, but I have to leave," she told him, already grabbing her coat. Before Daniel could respond, Alexander appeared from around the corner. "What's going on?" Emily explained in a rush. She expected him to tell her to sort it out after work, or at least to sound irritated, but instead he pulled out his phone. "I'll drive you," he said simply. The offer caught her off guard. "You don't have to." "I know," he interrupted, "but I'm doing it anyway." The ride to the school was quiet, except for the sound of rain against the car windows. Emily glanced at him once or twice, Still processing how the man who barked orders at board members without blinking was now navigating city traffic just to help her. When they arrived, Sophie was pale and drowsy. Alexander surprised Emily again by crouching down to Sophie's level. His voice gentle. "Hey, kiddo. Let's get you home and warm, all right?" Sophie nodded weakly, too tired to wonder who this sharply dressed stranger was. The rest of the afternoon, Alexander stayed. He fetched medicine from the pharmacy, made tea, even fixed the squeaky hinge on Emily's kitchen door while Sophie slept. "You don't have to babysit us," Emily said at one point, watching him from the doorway. "I'm not," he replied. "I just didn't want you to be alone today." For a moment, his eyes softened in a way she hadn't seen before. She realized then that beneath the expensive suits and the boardroom glare was a man who perhaps had been lonely for a long time. The next day at work, the atmosphere between them had shifted. It was subtle, an extra second of eye contact, a tone that was less clipped when he spoke to her, but the rest of the office noticed. Whispers followed them down the hall. One evening, as they were both leaving late, Alexander asked, "Do you want to get dinner? No clients, no business talk. Just dinner." Emily hesitated, her mind racing through all the reasons it was a bad idea. He was her boss. He was Alexander Blackstone. But then she thought about the man who had spent an afternoon making sure her daughter was comfortable. "All right," she said quietly. Dinner turned into a walk along the Thames, the city lights shimmering on the water. They talked about their childhoods, hers filled with hard work and small joys, his overshadowed by pressure and the weight of expectation. "My father believed kindness was weakness," Alexander admitted. "He built this company from nothing, but he never knew how to build people. I learned early that if you wanted to survive, you had to be harder than everyone else." Emily listened, understanding more now than she ever had about the man everyone feared. "Maybe surviving isn't the same as living," she said gently. He looked at her, a flicker of vulnerability passing through his expression. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," she replied. "But it's worth trying." Over the next few weeks, they grew closer. Emily noticed he laughed more. Not the polite, empty laugh she'd heard in meetings, but genuine, unguarded laughter. He began asking after Sophie, even bringing her a small box of chocolates from the CEO's desk one Friday. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon that everything came to a point. Emily had been helping Sophie with a school project when her doorbell rang. Alexander stood there, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. "For you," he said almost sheepishly. "And I wanted to tell you something." Emily stepped aside, letting him in. Sophie waved before running off to her room. Alexander took a deep breath. "When I met you, you were just another name on the payroll. Then you stood up to me. No one does that. And instead of hating you for it, I respected you. Then I started liking you. And now..." He broke off, searching for the right words. "Now I can't imagine walking into that office without seeing you there." Emily's chest tightened. She'd been trying not to think about how much she'd come to care for him, but hearing it out loud. "I don't know if this is a good idea," she admitted. "You're my boss." "Then I'll find a way to change that," he said without hesitation. "But I'm not going to pretend I don't want this." Her lips curved into a small smile. "You've gone from terrifying to surprisingly persuasive, you know that?" He smiled back, truly smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. A few months later, the office still buzzed with whispers, but they no longer came from fear of Alexander Blackstone. The man who had once ruled with an iron will now carried a softness in his gaze, at least when it landed on Emily. And as for Emily, she'd learned that sometimes standing up to the most intimidating person in the room didn't just change the workplace. It changed two lives forever.